It looks like everyone is just as excited as I am to be here. It's been a few years now since we first planned to say this. Welcome to Boston for the NACTO Designing Cities Conference. I first want to acknowledge the tremendous effort that's brought us here today. From the incredible NACTO staff, to our 3 host cities of Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville, and to so many partners who make this convening possible, including all of you. Thank you for being part of the NACTO network. It's really wonderful to see you here. And while I'm so excited for us to be together again, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge what makes this particular moment feel so meaningful. 2.5 years ago, the world changed. In our own office, in the middle of a frigid February, we started wiping down keyboards, using our elbows to enter the elevator, and asking ourselves if we should be together in the office at all. Everything felt uncertain, yet we started learning and taking steps to protect our communities, avoiding gatherings and keeping our distance from each other, many of the very things that make us feel connected in the first place. On March 11th, I heard from Sam Zimbabwe, then the Seattle Director of Transportation. Seattle was in crisis, the first known COVID epicenter in the US. And Sam wanted to share what they were learning with other cities likely to face the same very soon. The next day, we held a call for the NACTO network. And for an hour, Sam shared what Seattle was seeing and answered other cities' questions about how they were responding. In that tumultuous week in early March 2020, when information was evolving at a dizzying pace, the NACTO network came together to connect and learn from each other. In the following weeks and months, cities from coast to coast and around the world rapidly remade their streets, rerouted and rescheduled buses, found PPE for their frontline staff, changed all protocols for social distancing, and continued adapting and adapting and adapting again on the fly. In a time of such rapid disruption and learning and change, we exchanged information through NACTO's COVID-19 Transportation Response Center. From hundreds of messages flying on the NACTO listservs, to city staff sharing on calls, on videos, in interviews, and directly with each other, this time of crisis showed us the power of this community. The past 2.5 years tested each of us in this room, personally, professionally, as public servants. We've grieved, we've raged, we've shown resolve and resilience. We've found joy and found new ways of being together in community. And I'm so grateful to be here in this room with all of you today. In times of crisis, we need each other. Look around at the people in this room. So many people in this room. There's power in this learning community. I've seen you all offer your energy, your expertise, your emergent ideas. You've brought curiosity and creativity and radical imagination. When you need help, you ask. When you have something to offer, you do so generously. These last 2 years have been defined by distance. And despite that, our community is growing. Since we last gathered in Toronto in 2019, we've welcomed 12 new agencies to this network. Let's give them a warm welcome. Please stand up if you're from AC Transit, Albuquerque, Calgary, Durham, Fort Worth, Fremont, Fresno, Hartford, Providence, Richmond, St. Petersburg, and Spokane. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. The past few years have taught us a lot about adapting through disruption, about finding our North Stars, about centering justice in everything we do. The years ahead will require us to continue to practice new ways of thinking, of working, of being. We're still navigating a pandemic that thankfully we now have better tools to manage. And we need you to be at the forefront for the other crises that we're facing. the traffic safety crisis, the climate crisis, an economy that increasingly leaves people behind, and the deep and enduring racial inequities in our communities. Our ability to adapt and make it through comes from each other, using the networks we have to find solutions to problems we've yet to solve, or in many cases, even faced before. Let's use the time together this week to inspire each other, to support each other, and to challenge each other to find our learning edge. Let's recharge our collective battery and roll up our sleeves together for the work ahead. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce someone who leads with imagination and resilience. Someone who, in just his 8th month on the job, crafted and is executing a robust emergency response plan to an extraordinary situation that's showing us, yet again, the importance of creativity and clear communication and commitment to public service. Through these challenging times, our network is seeing leaders forged in the fire, leaders like the incredible and dedicated public servant I'm so honored to introduce. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Boston's Chief of Streets, Jascha Franklin-Hodge.
Thank you, Corinne, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Boston. It is 2 years late, but we are glad that you are here. But you've come to Boston at an interesting moment. As Corinne alluded to, and to be honest, I'm a little bit embarrassed to be welcoming America's foremost transportation leaders to a city that's in the midst of an unprecedented transit shutdown. But the past month has shown light on some real important truths about transportation here in Boston. The MBTA's decision to shut down the Orange Line for 30 days to perform critical deferred maintenance is the fruit of decades of neglect of our public transit system. And turning off our second biggest subway line has helped highlight just how critical that transit system is to daily life in Boston. There's nothing quite like the sight of an entire street filled with replacement shuttle buses to kind of graphically illustrate just the spatial efficiency and the criticality of our rail transit system. And the impacts of that shutdown on the more than 100,000 people who use the Orange Line every day to get to work, to get to medical appointments, to see friends, on the more than 5,000 students who rely on the Orange Line every day to get to school. This impact reminds us how easy it is for us to take our transportation system for granted and neglect the investments that we need to make to keep our cities moving. But in the face of this tremendous disruption, we've seen the signs of what a better future might look like. Boston and surrounding communities have rolled out the red carpet for shuttle buses. We've built miles of bus lanes to accommodate these buses, and those have been built in a matter of weeks. Our Blue Bike system, our public bike share system, is setting ridership record after ridership record as bikes show their value as a part of our transportation system, and bike share shows its value as part of our public transit system. And the Region's Transit Agency, the MBTA, is finally working to rapidly deliver on a set of repairs and upgrades that, if it is successful, will eliminate much of the delay and the unreliability that have plagued the Orange Line for years. This kind of vision for a stronger, greener transportation future is the hallmark of our mayor, Michelle Wu. First as a city councilor and now as mayor, she has been a consistent and thoughtful advocate for better transit, safer streets, and connected bike infrastructure. It's not every mayor that would happily describe herself as a transportation nerd or adopt the Wu Train Twitter handle as her own. But she does not treat transportation as this sort of set of siloed government services to be delivered or a group of advocates who need to be placated. She sees transportation as part of the foundation necessary to make progress in so many areas that are core to her agenda. Whether we're talking about environmental justice, sensible climate policy, access to housing and economic opportunity. And she draws on her own experience as a transit rider, as a cyclist, as a parent, to help keep people at the center of her vision for transportation. In Mayor Wu's first year, she is making investments to accelerate the transformation of how we get around in Boston. We've launched a 2-year fare-free bus pilot to understand how fare policy can impact access and equity in the city. We've increased investment in bus lanes to prioritize transit on our streets and to improve service. We're building protected bike lanes to give safe space for people who travel on 2 wheels. And we are focused on safety to make sure that everyone, regardless of age or ability, can stay safe no matter how they travel. She's also investing in the people that we need in government to make this work real on our streets. We are embarking on an unprecedented round of hiring in the Streets Cabinet, adding 46 new positions this year, from junior staff to senior leadership. So if you're interested in this work, please visit boston.gov/streets-jobs to see some of our current postings and to let us know how to get in touch with you. In a recent editorial, the Boston Globe lauded Mayor Wu's stubborn optimism in the face of our current transit crisis. It's the optimism that says that we can continue to grow our city around transit as we work towards building the robust and reliable system that we need. It's the optimism to treat public transit as a public good and to make the case that fare policy can be a tool for transportation justice. It's the optimism to invest dollars and political capital to build streets that prioritize transit, walking, and biking. And it is the clear-eyed understanding that these changes will not be easy. It will take both a vision for what is possible and a willingness to bring people along, to build trust, and to create coalitions that can make change happen. And I could not be more proud to work alongside her in this effort. So it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Boston Mayor Michelle Wu.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and it is an incredible honor to host the NACTO conference here. Thank you to the best chief of streets in the country, Jascha Franklin-Hodge, for your generous introduction. Jascha and his team make it look cool and smooth, but it has been a tremendous amount of work supporting and partnering with the MBTA to manage all of the above ground diversionary systems while the T is fixing up tunnels underground. And we are proud to have been part of partnering with NACTO as well, but I just want to recognize the entire Boston Transportation Department's efforts and hours and leadership. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. I also want to thank and just express how lucky I am that in addition to our Chief of Streets, I am blessed to have the best Chief of Staff anywhere in the country, Tiffany Chu, who is no stranger to NACTO or the transportation world. Thank you for everything. And it's an honor always to appear alongside or to share a stage with my 2 powerhouse colleagues in municipal government here, but to co-host this conference alongside Somerville Mayor Katjana Ballantyne and Cambridge Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui. Thank you for your leadership in so many ways. So Jascha and I had a fun bike ride over here with a few of you all. I know some members of our City of Boston Bike and Active Transportation Employee Resource Group were also joining us, and so we want to thank you for your work throughout the day in and day out. I will start with a fun fact about biking in Boston. 126 years ago, the City Council passed a proposal to allow bike riders only to scorch during the months of June, July, and August between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Scorching being the official term for riding any faster than 8 miles an hour. So I'm very proud to say that all of us scorched over here from City Hall to this conference, and that we are seeing more and more people joining those numbers, whether it's related to the Orange Line situation or the ongoing recognition of how important, how joyful, how necessary it is to be building up our cycling infrastructure. We've come a long way from single-digit speed limits. Just yesterday, we also, here in Boston, launched the citywide design process that will use some of our federal ARPA funding to bring safer streets to every neighborhood across our city. We'll add 9.4 miles of new protected bike lanes throughout Boston by next year. And in the next 3 years, we'll be adding more than 100 new blue bike stations, growing the number of bikes in our bike share system by 40%. We're building speed humps and raised crosswalks throughout our neighborhoods to calm traffic, slow vehicles down, and make our streets safer, not only for cyclists, but for every one of our road users. To encourage all of our residents to enjoy the benefits of these investments, we're also hosting free Learn to Bike workshops for women and gender-diverse adults, and creating a $1.5 million rebate program for older adults and people with disabilities to purchase e-bikes. Now, I have to admit that I wasn't always so aware and involved in the ways in which transit and transportation shape our communities. I grew up in an immigrant family and did all the things that you are supposed to do to get through school and move on to the next phase of life. And until I picked back up my new grown-up bike a number of years ago when I was a city councilor, it had been decades since I was last on a bike, and I think it was this big with streamers coming out of the handlebars. And then I had my 2 boys, and before they were old enough to start pre-K, they would come to our City Health childcare program with me. And so here I was, newly back on a bike, a city councilor, really trying to understand how we could use our infrastructure and policy-making power to shape things, and meanwhile needed to find a way downtown every single day with 2 babies in a stroller. And so I would drop off my oldest and youngest at daycare and rely on our transit system, experiencing all of the ins and outs and the pain points of what that can mean when we're not centering people and all people in every way. On weekdays, we take a bus to the Orange Line, then the Orange Line to State Street with a double stroller in peak hours, if we could squeeze onto those trains. We had to build a half hour extra into our commute just to account for unexpected delays, or the elevators that made it just so you missed the next train, or cars that were too full for us to fit. And it was either that, or pay 3 times as much to take the commuter rail, which would be often much more efficient, predictable, but at times I would be the only person of color on the entire train car. For more than 25,000 households, a commuter rail pass for Zone 2 costs about 10% of their monthly income. And public transit isn't just how people get to work in the mornings. It's how you get to play dates, medical appointments, weekend activities, time with your family. Public transit is our connection to everything: work, school, fun, community. As someone raising a family in Boston, working in local government, and trying to find safe, reliable, affordable ways for all of us to thrive in the city, it is painfully clear that inaccessible, inefficient transit doesn't just create barriers to mobility, it creates barriers to opportunity and silos our communities. But the nice thing is, the inverse of that is also true. About 2 weeks ago, my neighbors and I hosted our annual block party in Roslindale. And over the course of several hours, hundreds of residents came from all across different neighborhoods to eat and dance and bounce in the bouncy house and enjoy ice cream, connect with each other. And this year, we saw residents from all over, many of whom wouldn't have been able to come otherwise, join us because the commuter rail has been offering free service while the Orange Line and parts of the Green Line are shut down for repairs. Now, there's something tangibly different, palpably more giving about the energy at an event where everyone is fully present, where people can enjoy time together without having to worry about patching together that carpool or paying for a return ticket or getting the stress of how to map out all the various transfers of how to get home. Thanks to a temporarily, at least in this case, more affordable transit system, we were able to create a more accessible, more inclusive space that brought together more people from more neighborhoods. We were able to welcome all of Boston to our little corner of Boston. Accessible, affordable, reliable transit doesn't just tear down the barriers built by ineffective transportation systems, It creates opportunity and fosters community actively, intentionally. We know that shorter commute times are correlated with increased economic mobility, and we know that delays and longer rides disproportionately impact riders of color, with Black bus riders in Boston pre-pandemic spending 64 more hours per year on city buses on average compared to white riders. These impacts are too important and too critical not to prioritize. So, in Boston, we are prioritizing them. We started with our fare-free bus program. For more than a year now, the 28 bus has been fare-free, and for the last 6 months, 2 additional routes, the 23 and the 29, have also been fare-free and will continue to be for at least another year and a half. And so far, in just the time span that we have watched and measured, there has been an exponential increase in ridership compared to system-wide numbers. Roughly 60% of the riders on these 3 lines are low income, more than 96% are people of color, and we've heard from so many families that eliminating fares has been life-changing, opening up new possibilities, as well as making the system run better, speeding up boarding and keeping the buses running on schedule, creating a more reliable system that connects people with resources, community centers, and a sense of belonging in this city. Of course, these routes are still vulnerable to the same issues that plague transit users across Boston. The congestion that results from having to fight with cars for space on the road, which is why just last year we cut the ribbon on New England's first ever dedicated center-running bus lane along Columbus Ave. And as Jascha mentioned, when the Orange Line shut down, we knew that traffic would only get worse with thousands of riders turning to alternative modes of transit. So his team has been working furiously to create more bus-only lanes and quote-unquote pop-up bike lanes. We may have used permanent paint on some of them. Making blue bikes free across the region, replacing damaged sidewalks by shuttle stops, and posting wayfinding signage to improve accessibility. So while the shutdown has been in many ways disruptive, it has also been an opportunity for us to pilot a new vision for Boston's infrastructure and to show just how quickly we can move when we choose to. Boston is a city that needs to be full of community spaces, green spaces, opportunities, connected by fast, free, reliable transit and streets that are safe no matter how you navigate them. That is our vision. That is what our residents want. A survey conducted last year found that half of Boston's residents would bike more if their neighborhood had a dedicated bike lane, which is why yesterday we didn't just announce that we'd be closing gaps in our existing bike network, but that we'd be expanding it so that 50% of all of our residents in the next 3 years will be just a 3-minute walk from a safe, connected bike route. That doesn't just mean safer streets for cyclists, pedestrians, and drivers. It's also reductions in traffic, noise pollution, harmful emissions, and better transit and transportation access that leads to more transit-oriented housing opportunities that will help us lift the burdens of our housing shortage as well. To that end, last year we established a maximum parking ratio for developments over 50,000 square feet and also did away with parking minimums for affordable housing developments, and we want to go further. Now, of course, there are many planners in this room, and everyone has been to many a public meeting. We know that these decisions come with trade-offs. Not everyone is going to be happy about fewer parking spots and the upfront costs of making investments in a more robust transit infrastructure. But in honor of the T's 125th birthday, which we just celebrated a few days ago, I would like to share my favorite story about the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority. When the MBTA was first introduced, or when the idea was first introduced of building an underground subway, it was called dangerous and radical. An anti-subway league was formed, mobilizing residents to vote against building a subway system anywhere within Boston city limits. The league's president, W.G. Harris, warned of the, quote, damage to business which will necessarily follow so extensive a tearing up of the street. People worried about what might result. There were very real warnings issued about the rodents that would be unleashed, snakes that would overtake all of Boston if the streets were dug up, curses and awakening of spirits and everything underground. Ultimately, it was put to a vote, and construction for America's first subway system was allowed to move forward by a margin of 4%. In its first decade of operation, public transit ridership in Boston jumped nearly 60%. People who lived far from downtown were suddenly connected to jobs, healthcare, education, housing, and the arts in ways that they had never been before. Areas that were previously resource deserts because of their distance from the city blossomed into so-called streetcar suburbs, expanding our population and economy and transforming Boston into a thriving metropolitan hub. The MBTA is far from perfect, but it's hard to imagine that Boston would be better off without a subway in any part of the city at all. My point is, change can be inherently disruptive. It's hard and often controversial. But to make real progress, you can't be afraid to tear up the street, especially if, after all that tearing, we end up with something stronger, safer, and in fact, that connects all of us even more. Because at the end of the day, that is where our focus lies, on making transit less about the movement between people and spaces and more about the connection between them. We are so excited to be hosting all of you in person for the first time since 2019. And the work of building connections by definition cannot be solitary. For public transit to truly be a public good, it must be built by the community, for the community, and I know that this community is dedicated to doing just that. Now, Jascha was subtle about this before. I'm going to be less subtle. You all think we're hosting this to be a good partner and all of this and advancing the transportation justice movement, but we need 46 of you all to join our team. We need to fill our roles at the City of Boston. This is not a city or a region that is going to wait to do things comfortably, conveniently, when we get everyone on board. We have no time to waste for our kids, for their kids. This is a city where we are making things happen. You can feel it all around, you can see it, and we are trying to build momentum with every bit of talent we can marshal. We need you to join our team. We would be honored to have you serve alongside us. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you especially to the Boston Transportation team.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of Transit Matters. I'll tell you a little bit about Transit Matters. So Transit Matters has been advocating for better transit in the greater Boston area for about a decade now, with our special brand of technical advocacy, whether it was tactical urbanism efforts to maybe not entirely legally put up posters that then influence the MBTA to design better posters for their diversions, or our campaign to make commuter rail work better for all riders, regardless of income or their trip purpose, or centering the need for better operations in the bus network. Transit Matters is all about data-driven, people-focused advocacy. And we're just one part of a really incredible public transit, cycling, pedestrian, social justice, and environmental advocacy community. And we're incredibly lucky to have incredible municipal partners. Thank you, Mayor Wu, and thank you, Jascha. And also have the incredible leaders that I'm about to introduce from the cities of Somerville and Cambridge. So as a proud Summer Bridge resident, I live right on the boundary, but I do live in Somerville, so I have to put Somerville on the front. Sorry, Mayor Siddiqui. But yeah, I'm incredibly proud to introduce Mayor Siddiqui and Mayor Ballantyne. So, Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui is currently serving in her third term on the Cambridge City Council and her second as mayor. Mayor Siddiqui immigrated to the United States from Karachi, Pakistan at the age of 2, along with her parents and twin brother. She was raised in Cambridge affordable housing at the Ringe Towers and the Roosevelt Towers and attended Cambridge public schools. Mayor Siddiqui's passion for service and youth representation motivated her to found the Cambridge Youth Council, which is now in its 20th year. She's also an AmeriCorps alum, a fellow AmeriCorps alum at New Profit. And as mayor, her priorities have been increasing affordable housing, supporting local businesses, improving Cambridge public schools, and leading Cambridge through the COVID-19 pandemic. In response to this, she launched the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund, which raised over $5 million to help individuals, small businesses, and nonprofits. Started the Cambridge Rise, one of the first guaranteed income pilots in the country, and initiated an early college pilot. She's also chaired the Mayor's Task Force on Tenant Displacement, led a program to increase scholarship funding for low-income children to attend high-quality preschools, and implemented a children's savings account. Mayor Siddiqui looks forward to continuing to make Cambridge a more equitable and civically engaged community. All right. And Mayor Katjana Ballantyne is now serving in her first term as the mayor of Somerville. She has a deep commitment to progress with over 30 years of leadership experience in government, nonprofits, startup, and international business. She previously served 8 years on the City Council and 2 as City Council President. Her experience in government, business, and nonprofits qualify her to uniquely understand the challenges and the challenges of a complex city. Her leadership experience and life experience as an immigrant, engaged parent, and decades-long community advocate have taught her the value of inclusive leadership. Her key priorities are housing affordability, job growth and training, diversity, social justice, education, and youth development. She has been a leader in climate responsibility, not only authoring her city's own Green New Deal resolution, but co-authoring the Green New Deal resolution for the entire state and the Massachusetts Now resolution that was adopted by the Democratic Party in their platform. And a fun fact, and this is one of the things that Mayor Ballantyne told me when we first met, she really, walks the walk literally when it comes to, having an environmentally friendly lifestyle. Her and her family of 4 have been car-free for 14 years, choosing to walk, take public transit, or bike around the city. And so it's not unusual to see her on a bus, on the Green Line, or walking and biking around Somerville. All right, Mayor Ballantyne. All right, welcome. All right, so the first question is, can you tell me very briefly about your own relationship to your city's transportation system, whether as a transit rider, pedestrian, or however you choose to get around your city, and what insights has that offered you? Mayor Siddiqui?
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, NACTO. Thank you, everyone, for having us here. So I grew up on the T. I loved riding the 83 bus in Cambridge with my mom and my dad, getting to, what Mayor Wu mentioned earlier, daily life, whether it was school, whether it was activities. And my dad actually uses the 69 bus and then changes to the Green Line to go to work right near Copley every day as a shipping clerk. So I see firsthand how important transit is, how important reliable transit is to all our communities, but especially our low-income families and the most vulnerable. So for me, it's a really close relationship with the T. I love the T, and I still love using it.
Thank you.
So thank you. First, I have to say I'm so excited to be in this room with like-minded people that we're all working for, better transportation, better access. So thank you so much for being here, and I've enjoyed co-hosting with Mayor Siddiqui and Mayor Wu. My foray with public transit, it's a regional approach. As you said, I'm an immigrant. I moved to Chelsea back in 1986. I didn't own a car. I ended up working in Lynn, got my first job there. I had to take 2 buses, stop and walk across 6 lanes of highway to get to my job on the Linway in some warehouse district. I've had to commute into Kendall Square through Chelsea's produce markets at 5:30 in the morning with the truckers coming out of the airport. I will say the truckers are very polite at 5:30 in the morning. They give you wide berth. I have commuted on my bike for 5 years, leading a nonprofit in Dorchester from West Somerville, which is adjacent to North Cambridge, going down Mass Ave, and basically all the way through to Dorchester Ave to get to my work. I'm really intimate with the streets. I've had to work or ride on every single line here in the city. I know the transition points where you have to be. And then, you know, I had the opportunity to move to Somerville and become a parent. And as you said, we're a car-free family of 4. I've taught my kids how to ride on the streets of Somerville. We live in the West, but my kids went to school in the East. My now 14-year-old at 10 started saying, "Mama, I can ride these streets of Somerville. Please let me ride." So, you know, we scoped out patterns and determined which time during the day was the best time for her and the safest time, and, you know, slowly let her go on. And then 4 years ago, we moved my 91-year-old dad in with us. He's living with dementia. He decided about a year and a half ago that he would take a walk during the night. We had to spend a bit of time trying to find him, but I thought of infrastructure in a very different way, living with someone who has dementia, who might wander. We found him maybe 4 hours later, not too far, but 4 hours later, about a half mile from our house. And when we found him, I said, "Dad, you know, how's it going? You know, how did you get there?" Because nobody thought he could walk that far. He's limited mobility. I didn't say that. He uses a walker. And he said to me, "Katjana," he says, "you have these wonderful trees." And he said, so I would walk, and then I would touch a tree, and I'd take a break. And I honestly look at trees on our sidewalks. I was concerned about the bumps and the heaves in the sidewalk, but that the trees not only, you know, provide shade and all the other things that we need, but also for someone who has limited mobility and is aging, you know, provides a safety, a brace. So my approach to this region is it's all intersected. It's all necessary. I'm a partner with you on this. I'm just so thrilled to be in this audience with you because together, you know, we can make it better, certainly.
Absolutely. It's a great reminder that, you know, our relationship with our public transit systems and the streets are deeply personal. So, I mean, one of the, you know, the key themes of this conference, even in the hosting of it, you know, being hosted by 3 cities, is regional collaboration, you know, the importance of cities working together. And so can you tell us about, can you tell us about that approach? Can you tell us, you know, how you all have worked together, and sort of what are some of the key ingredients you see as for having a successful regional partnership? Mayor Siddiqui?
Sure. Effective communication is really critical. We have Cambridge and Somerville share a border. We share so many shared streets. So our departments are constantly talking to one another. And here's where I shout out our Cambridge department. We have Joe, Andy, Suzanne, they do such an incredible job, and really they're the reason we're successful at building these strong regional partnerships. So they're in constant conversation with Somerville about our bike lanes. We're both building out our bike lane infrastructure. And so we want to make sure the bike lanes are continuous, that they're working together, and we're building an effective regional network. Another example, and I know the mayor has much more to say on this, but with the Green Line extension, that was really unprecedented to have cities working together to say, look, we need this project to happen, and we want to commit funding to it. But it was not easy, and I know you'll definitely say more because you're really involved in that effort. But again, cities working together to talk about our shared priorities and really working together to stand up for many priorities. So those are some examples, but we're constantly in communication and working together. Mayor?
And Mayor Ballantyne, too, one of the other angles is, not only the municipal collaboration, but also, you have multiple state highways through the city of Somerville and even state park roads. So you talk about that as well?
Yes, I mean, it's relationship building, it's active participation, and it's inclusive leadership style. I believe in that. I don't know everything. My staff knows more than I do, and they're awesome. So I'll give a shout out to Brad, Allie, Kate, Justin, my economic development team, and more who are here today. Thank you. Is that we're just interdependent. We can't work in a silo. I would say at the beginning, and I'm happy that Mayor Wu mentioned rats. Rats know no boundaries. They're just like how we think that our issues don't cross borders is certainly not an approach that I believe in. It's relationship. It's active participation. It's including. It's working on the MPO. It's working with MAPC. It's working with Metro's mayors. I'm sure there's, many more that we work with. It's working with our federal delegation, our state delegation, and all the transportation advocates and who live in our community. I personally have learned so much from the residents. They are our brain trust because they're passionate about these issues and they know how to get the technical through. So we just work with everybody.
Thank you. The last couple of years have really, brought a reckoning when it comes to, racial justice, and really, highlighting, the need for a renewed focus on economic inequality. And so, what does that look like when it comes to transportation? What role does transportation play in your equity goals?
Sure. I think about this question, and I think about what I said earlier, and thinking about who is using our public transportation system and why. And, even looking at our guaranteed income pilot, we're seeing, we're wondering what people are using the extra $500 a month for, and some of it, a lot of it, transportation costs. And so when you think about equity, equity has to be at the forefront. And so in Cambridge, we're looking at a lot of different things. As Mayor Wu mentioned, we're really excited about the work that is happening around Fare Free. We have a working group that just concluded and recommended different lines that we'd love to collaborate with the MBTA on, and Boston, and making some of our lines fare free. But beyond that, we've, similar to Somerville, we're providing T-passes to our high school students. I know Somerville's started with middle school students, and we're working on that as well. We're looking, as we think about building out our infrastructure for bike lanes, we can build all the infrastructure we want, but do people have bikes, right? We want to make sure people have bikes, so we partner with a great nonprofit, Cambridge Bike Give Back, who provides bikes to our residents who need these bikes. Blue bike stations, we're making sure that they're in all neighborhoods. And along with what Mayor Wu said, it's also about education and making sure that people feel safe. So we provide many, many workshops, many trainings to make sure that our residents are getting around. We're also doing a lot of work with our pedestrian ways. We're looking at key intersections, key streets to make sure that they are ADA accessible. We want to do everything we can to help our elderly, those who have disabilities, walk through these streets, make them feel comfortable. Really, it goes back to the residents and the user experience. Everything we do, we want to keep that in mind. So those are some examples of the work in Cambridge that we're doing. One final thing that we are doing, we're looking at our shuttles. We have so many shuttles. We have MIT using shuttles. We have Harvard shuttles. We have Leslie shuttles. We have developers with their own shuttles. Then we have some more shuttles. So we're looking at all these shuttles and saying, what's the overlap? How do we benefit residents, frankly? So that work will lead, to some recommendations. So there's a lot of work that we're doing, but equity has to be at the forefront of everything we do.
We have to use every tool possible in our toolkit. Many that Mayor Siddiqui has just mentioned, we're also doing in Somerville. But we also have to ask ourselves, what does equity look like in Somerville? Somerville is 4 square miles. Cambridge is 45 square miles. Boston is 90 square miles. Our budget is $294 million. Cambridge is $801 million. Boston is $4 billion. So for us, what can we do? And our neighborhoods, our low-income neighborhoods, the subsidized housing units are scattered throughout the city. So one of the first things that when we were trying to figure, can we do fare free? Well, does fare free, so ask yourself is, who do you want to help? Where can we really deliver on progressive values? And a lot of it is with our youth. We're a majority minority school district. We know that the kids had to pay for their school passes. So why have kids pay for their school passes? So we said, that is a way that we can really deliver on equity, because if we take the 88 bus, that might pick up a few kids, but it leaves out, about 600 other housing units where families are living with their children that couldn't benefit from the use of that. So we then look to say, well then, how do we give the parents access of the children who are living in the public school system? So it's really drilling down on who lives in your neighborhood. Again, I'm thrilled to be here, but Somerville is different. It's smaller, and if we want to deliver on those equity goals and make sure that we're not doing, using equity as a buzzword, that we need to figure out who. So we've targeted people and residents who could most benefit for that. On a regional level, totally support fare free. Somerville can't do that alone. And so, I've supported and signed on to petitions to do the fare free, and we are continuing to focus on that. And, as the T for us proposes their redesign of their bus network, it's advocating for the residents who really use public transportation and really need it. It is their lifeline to get to school, to work, to go grocery shopping. And they can't be allowed to have to commute to maybe go 2.5 miles to go grocery shopping. In Somerville, if you know, Market Basket is the place where you go grocery shopping. Right now, it's one bus route for a number of our neighborhood communities, and it would turn into 2. We know we can't allow that to happen. All the data is there that low-income areas it takes them longer to get someplace. So our goals are going to be to prioritize our communities, our neighborhoods who need the access, and make it as easy and as seamless as possible for them.
Thank you. Well, and then Mayor Siddiqui, did you want to talk briefly about some of the fare-free programs that are underway in Cambridge?
Yeah, right now we're in the gathering data phase, and so we would love to look at we are looking at the one bus, and we've had some initial conversations with the MBTA, but when we think about the one, particularly in Cambridge, we're drilling down, right? We are thinking about who would benefit the most, and so the one bus is something that, our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley's talked about the one a good amount, and we'd love to, so we're diligently working on that. We had a meeting right before this, all on Zoom. Literally, we were all at the conference, but we were like separate areas and saying, okay, what are some next steps? So we're actively working, no big news to share yet, but the working group had some different recommendations when it comes to our partnerships with other municipalities, but and some routes inside of Cambridge too.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you, Mayor Siddiqui, Mayor Ballantyne. Again, it's just, the relationship between Somerville and Cambridge is just such a great, example of municipal collaboration. Again, whether it's, partially, saving the Green Line, as you alluded to earlier, or the ways that, so many streets, so many bike lane projects, are, cross municipal boundaries. So, wonderful to get to speak with both of you. And again, welcome everyone to the conference, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so amazing to have these mayors with us today, such thoughtful and responsive and dedicated leaders. Thank you all for sharing your time with us. And speaking of someone who's dedicated so much, a true force for our movement, our next speaker really needs no introduction, so I'll waste no time. Please welcome to the stage former New York City DOT Commissioner and current NACTO Chair, Jeanette Sadiq-Khan.
Okay. Wow, it is so great to be here with all of you. NACTO 2022. Let's see if we can get this going. There we go. So we are in Boston, the home of the Green Monster and the 2022 conference. And this year, this conference has been 2 years in the making. And the last time I saw many of you was actually in Toronto, right? It's been a minute. And this actually is the NACTO GDCI team in the conference in 2019. And this is the same team at our 2020 off-site retreat after 6 months of Zoom meetings and preparing for our first virtual conference. I think we all know that feeling. But we're here with you today, and we made it to Boston and Cambridge and Somerville, and we are ready to chop it up with all of you. And it's not special just because we're back, but it's special because 2022 is a milestone year. It is the 10th anniversary of the Designing Cities Conference. And if you were at that conference 10 years ago, is somebody here not from NACTO staff that was at that conference? Raise your hand. Oh, Joe Barr, I think you are NACTO. In fact, you're essence of NACTO. Right here? Okay, that's one. One prize for you. Anybody else? Ooh, right over here. Prizes for you. So 10 years ago, you will recall, we were gathering at NYU, and it was a different world. Barack Obama was president. Polly Trottenberg was the number 3 at US DOT. Pete Buttigieg was in the US Navy. Gabe Klein and Ed Reskin, I think, were among the last bearded men to run a big city transportation agency. And Chris Hayes, who looked like he was 12 years old instead of his current 15. And now we have Pete Buttigieg as head of USDOT, and Polly Trottenberg is his number 2. So it's a big, wonderful series of developments. And we were a small organization in 2010, but we were bursting with big new ideas. And protected bike lanes were just coming into standard practice. The US had just 3 big bike share systems at the time. And a big transportation idea back then might have been a high visibility crosswalk. And we had big ideas, but we faced enormous obstacles. A decade ago, the options for designing city streets were large lanes or extra large lanes for cars, and virtually no regard for people walking or biking or taking transit. And basic street treatments were largely absent from federal standards. It was also the early days of transportation memes, like this one with Drake, who made his NACTO meme debut in LA in 2018. The years passed, but the federal manual governing signs and signals and markings, the notorious MUTCD, still didn't show any sidewalks. It was also a time of great strife and media and political backlash to the new changes that we were making on city streets, something that all of you know something about. And in 2012, the NACTO network was a small battalion of 15 cities and transit agencies that was really kind of a large therapy group. But that tight team wrote the first operating manual for city streets, the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, which Mike Bloomberg gave a big boost to at our first conference. No longer did you have to be a radical. We actually codified real road-tested standards for streets that were built for people. And we even got that guide into the hands of USDOT Secretary Ray LaHood. And it kind of looks like I'm holding a broom handle in his back to keep him at the podium. And I think Earl is doing a really good job pretending not to notice. And since that first conference, NACTO has grown from a 15-city confederacy to a premier organization of 90 of the biggest cities, from Boston to Burlington, Cambridge to Calgary, Somerville to San Luis Obispo, plus representatives from more than 200 among the 1,000 people that are attending this conference. Huge applause for all of you that are here today. This is a huge movement. It's incredible. This organization has grown, and so have the ideas, and so have the accomplishments, with more and better guidance, more miles of protected bike lanes, more bus lanes, more innovative designs that protect everybody on the street. And the places we've gone. We've released the Urban Street Design Guide, the Transit Street Design Guide, Guide for Stormwater, even a guide for the future with the Blueprint for Autonomous Urbanism, so that in the autonomous age, if and when it comes, instead of this, we plan for this. And let the driverless revolution plan itself around our people-first cities with room to walk and bike and ride transit instead of planning our cities around cars. It's true. And these guides help take the innovations that we see in one city and spread them quickly to the next without the risk of losing federal funding or incurring any additional liability. And it was at the NACTO conference in 2013 that FHWA Deputy Secretary Victor Mendez first suggested a federal endorsement for the Urban Street Design Guide. And within a year, in 2014, FHWA officially adopted the guide, and this was a quantum step. It used to be that we would issue a press release every time a state or federal government adopted a NACTO design guide, like when Massachusetts adopted the U.S. Street Design Guide in 2014, which is now standard operating procedure. And since then, we've seen transformations big and small in cities of every size. You can see it on Bell Street Park, which Seattle created in 2014, establishing a new typology for streets as park and open space. And it was initiated by Belltown residents, and it demonstrates how a bold vision for transformation can be realized through inclusive design and strong city-community collaboration. In Providence, Rhode Island, where a major highway bridge, Providence is in the house, people, and it's now a pedestrian bridge that doubles as park space. And this project makes new use of old infrastructure. When the city learned that it was going to take millions of dollars to remove the massive piers that supported the highway, it decided to leave them in place and build the pedestrian bridge instead, a lesson that Boston may want to take a look at going forward. Hoboken completed a redesign in 2019 of Washington Street, which was unsafe and functionally obsolete, creating new bikeways and bioswales and sidewalks and street furniture. And thanks to this and other interventions across the city, many of them simple and low cost, Hoboken hasn't had a single traffic death in 4 years. Incredible. And in Honolulu, a partnership with the American Cities Climate Challenge and the city delivered the first dedicated bus lane in 30 years, improving bus speed and safety on one of the downtown's busiest corridors, with 36 bus routes helping thousands of island riders. And in Houston, there's a quiet but persistent bike revolution. Yes, Houston's here. The city has added 400 miles of bike lanes under the Houston Bike Plan, with goals to meet the needs of non-drivers with every infrastructure project. And these designs build on the best of the best over the decade, like Vancouver or Market Street in San Francisco, where safe infrastructure was delayed by years from a lawsuit, but the city has played a strong game ever since. And these designs are making a difference in cities like Pittsburgh, which helps cyclists make key turns and connect the network, taking the stress out of a complicated route. And we've seen an explosion of bike lanes across the country thanks to all of you in the last decade. And it's not just in the usual suspects like New York or San Francisco, but in cities like Detroit and Salt Lake City. And when you reclaim and reallocate street space, people follow. Protected designs were unknown a decade ago, and today they've helped lead a golden age in cycling nationwide. And I'm happy to report that New York City continues to make great strides in cycling infrastructure over the last year, creating a new bike lane on the Brooklyn Bridge. And now Commissioner Rodriguez has plans to do the same on the Queensboro Bridge while making hundreds of car-free streets permanent. Many cities have used the pandemic, as Mayor Wu pointed out, as a transition point, consciously choosing not to return to the old status quo. San Francisco permanently shut its car-free drive through Golden Gate Park, giving people a low-stress corridor from the ocean through the city. And leaders like Mayor Plante in Montreal have pedestrianized major streets during the summer months and are now building more main streets into pedestrian and cycling superhighways. Cities continue to innovate, sometimes turning on a dime. When you walk out the door of this venue, you see a pop-up bike lane built in less than 2 weeks, and a bus lane built in even less time. And while this is part of Boston's response to an extraordinary situation, it's an example of the nimbleness and ingenuity of cities to meet the challenges that they increasingly face. And not to jinx it, but right after the first Designing Cities conference, the New York City area was hit by Hurricane Sandy. And in Austin in 2015, how many were in Austin in 2015? Okay, you remember that? We were hit by a tornado during the conference. And this conference was postponed 2 years because of the pandemic. And of course, this year, there have been a few hiccups on the T. All of this to say is that we've been here before. And I promise, hopefully this has nothing to do with the NACTO conference. But joking aside, all of you shine in the darkest of times, and the COVID pandemic tested all of us more than ever before. And reshaping transportation networks and streets to prioritize essential workers and to keep people safe. You've done an extraordinary job. An extraordinary job during the hardest of times. And working with NACTO's Streets for Pandemic Response and Recovery grant program, Atlanta created pop-up booths to share information, yes, and public health resources, while Alexandria used public spaces to bridge the digital divide in education. Madison piloted a vending program for small entrepreneurs, while Baltimore and Fort Collins, yes, Baltimore, installed community-led traffic calming public art projects. You've wrestled with difficult questions when protests for justice in the summer of 2020 shined a harsh light on our streets and the need to make them more equal. Work on this stage has engaged people like Tamika Butler in Seattle in 2016, or Kat Krieger and Desiree Williams-Raji in Toronto in 2019, and taught us and showed us how much more we need to do. NACTO has produced guidance that meets the growing scope of the street, from resetting speed limits in cities coast to coast to rethinking bicycle enforcement so that our laws and practices match the safety benefits that we strive for, to elevating the humble yet most powerful tool we have in the fight against climate change, the bus. The bus. And this impact can be seen in the street in Denver, which laid down 25 miles of red carpet for transit, including on Broadway, that Denver worked on with NACTO. And you can see this in person in our 2023 conference next year. Yes. Or here in the Bronx, in New York City. And in Seattle, red is the new blacktop for cities. I know it's a good line, right? All of these great ideas did not come from a federal manual. They came from city actions that were taken by many of you in this room. And you've changed the conversation, making traffic and speed and safe streets a citywide story, and created a new national dialogue that doesn't accept traffic deaths, pollution, and car culture as inevitable. Today, our friends at USDOT recognize NACTO's leadership and recognize that cities are transportation incubators and innovators. We've even incubated a global program which codified an entire world's worth of best practices into the Global Street Design Guide, which has been downloaded more than 60,000 times and translated into 6 languages. And used that as a template for our work and trainings with hundreds of cities, and finding that what works in Indianapolis works in Istanbul, where parking space could become people space, giving more room for people and making it better for business, and using the temporary treatments as the basis for permanent redesign. or a design that could well work in Fort Lauderdale could help make a place for people in a Fortaleza neighborhood. The Global Street Design Guide has been endorsed by 100 cities and global institutions. No other guide has done so much so fast and had such an impact on city streets around the world. And that path comes from our first conference 10 years ago to this global network of 100 cities. It's a straight line getting there from here. GDCI has grown so fast, it's now even bigger than NACTO, so that earlier this year, it became its own organization, which will help it grow and extend its reach even further. Reflecting back on the 10th anniversary of Designing Cities, it's electrifying to see what happens when cities share ideas and band together. Whether it's building a car-free bridge in Portland, letting bike bells ring in Philadelphia, unlocking the full power of buses on Mission Street, or replacing a highway with a complete street in Rochester. Cities are the ones moving the nation toward a safer, more sustainable future. Yeah. All of you. You know, and we've raised our standards over the last 10 years, and we need to continue to raise our ambitions because we do set the standards and think beyond the cycle paths towards streets and cities where people are built into every street. That's the thinking behind the superblocks of Barcelona and the plans for Paris that will eliminate half the parking in the city center and turn its streets into local traffic-only zones, making it easier to get around the city without a car. Designing streets for people from the start, looking at it from that point of view, not just using the small leftover space after everything else has been allocated to cars. Moving from this reality on 3rd Avenue in New York City to something that looks more like this. What these visions have in common is a focus on people and looking at the street not in terms of traffic capacity, but in terms of human possibility. What does a street in your city look like if you design it for human diversity instead of vehicle capacity? It looks like a place that people want to live, work, and play. Because whenever you have streets, you have the power to create places for people, and whenever you have people, you have possibilities. So much is riding on our streets over the next 10 years, whether it's the economy of cities or slowing global climate change. Redesigning streets is never easy, but building on the NACTO movement and the designs you've implemented across the continent over the last decade, we've never had a better chance than we do right now. And with the commitment, with the passion, and the drive of everyone in this room, our best lanes and our best cities are yet to come. So thank you, all of you, for all you've done. Thank you for what you've done for NACTO and for the United States of America.
All right. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you so much for the vision, the energy, the leadership, the drive you brought to this movement over the past decade and beyond. It's really incredible to reflect on the transformation of the past 10 years and to imagine what we can all accomplish together in the decade ahead. So now it's time for us to dive deep and start learning together in our first breakout sessions, but a few announcements before you get out of your seats. I first want to give huge thanks to our sponsors. Let me give enormous appreciation to the Barr Foundation, whose support has allowed us to bring community members from around the Boston region and municipal staff from across New England. Thank you, Barr Foundation. Thanks also to our Crystal and Gold sponsors, Motional, Waze, Amazon, and Super Pedestrian, whose generous support has made this conference possible. Thank you. And a few quick notes about our COVID protocols. As you've heard, this is the first conference that NACTO has hosted since the pandemic. We've put quite a bit of thought into how to do that responsibly and to create a space where people with varying levels of comfort feel included. So please help us to do that by masking indoors. And for everyone who wants some space to distance during meals, Ballroom C is a place to do that, to space out. I'd also like us to acknowledge that for many of us, this is the first large event we've been to in quite some time. Please give each other grace. Give the local team grace. Give our conference team grace. I'm so proud of what they've pulled off with all the circumstances facing us today, including navigating a major transit shutdown first announced just a few weeks ago. Most importantly, give yourselves grace. If you're still getting your conference sea legs, you're not alone. Spend some time in room 308, where the amazing team at Culture House has designed a pop-up space with many ways to rest, energize, and recharge. So for the rest of today, breakout sessions start at 3 o'clock. At 6, we have our opening reception at the House of Blues, starring uncivil servants. Rumor has it that you might recognize the bass player. Go download the conference app, where you'll get all your important updates. And that's all for now. Thanks for being here, and let's get this conference started.